For those of you here in the room and those of you watching online, my name is Gordon Flake. I'm the CEO of the Perth USAsia Centre, and it's my great honor to welcome you here this evening. Allow me to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. The University of Western Australia is on the land of the Noongar Whadjuk people, and we pay our respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. On behalf of the Perth USAsia Centre, it's my great honor to welcome you this evening to a program which is delighted to showcase Invest in Trade Western Australia. We're very fortunate this evening to have with us the Deputy Premier, Roger Cook. I would also acknowledge Consul General David Gaynor from the United States, Consul General Suzuki Toru from Japan, former Foreign Minister and Trade Minister and member of our board, Stephen Smith, and former State Minister of Education, Liz Constable, who also kindly serves on our board of directors, as well as the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation Director General, Rebecca Brown. We're delighted to have you all here. We're delighted to have all of you here. It's a beautiful evening. It's a time that I might be tempted to be outdoors. Sometimes you hope for worse weather. We also want to acknowledge and thank all of you who are watching this online as well. It's a tremendous opportunity for us to focus on Western Australia's trade and investment strategy. I think anybody who has lived in the state or lives in the state and knows the states realize that we are a state that has been built upon international connectivity, that trade and investment really is the state's lifeblood. And over the last 2 years, we've had a heavy focus on the pandemic, on the challenges it poses to our prosperity. But even through the pandemic, that international connectivity, that international investment has proven to be something that's been essential not just to the government, but to the private sector and thus to the citizenry of this state. And so it is a wonderful opportunity that we have this evening to introduce the Western Australia team, the team from the Department of Jobs, Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation. I practiced that 4 times, still working on it. We're going to kick off with some remarks from the Deputy Premier, Roger Cook. I think Roger needs no introduction in this audience, as his roles include Minister of Health. He's had a rather busy 2 years, but for this evening, he's also importantly has the role of Minister for State Development, Jobs and Trade. And in that context, we're really fortunate to have him give an opening keynote address to help frame the discussion we're going to be having for the rest of the evening. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the Deputy Premier, Roger Cook.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you very much, everyone, for the opportunity to join you at this important occasion. And can I begin just by joining Gordon and, in fact, all of you in acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk people of the proud Noongar Nation. We give thanks for sharing this incredible country with them and acknowledge their elders, past and present. Can I also acknowledge the Honourable Dr. Elizabeth Constable, AM, and Professor Stephen Smith, from Centre board members from the Perth USAsia Centre. Can my parliamentary colleagues, Mr. Simon Millman, MLA, Ms. Jessica Shaw, MLA, and the Honourable Dan Caddy, MLC, who are here tonight. Their Excellencies, David Gaynor, Consul General from the United States of America in Perth, and Suzuki Toru, the Consul General of Japan in Perth. I also want to acknowledge Rebecca Brown, the Director General of the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation, and Mr. Richard Sellers, the Director General of the Department of Mines and Industry Regulation and Safety, providing great leadership to our public sector. And also to Sarah Hooper from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Great to see you here as well. Distinguished guests all, it's terrific to see such a great turnout, because this is an important event, one which comes towards the end of hopefully our COVID-19 pandemic experience, and one which really expresses our ambitions and aspirations in terms of how we move forward around developing our international networks. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to the Invest and Trade WA Showcase, hosted by the Perth USAsia Centre, which is terrific. Thank you very much, Gordon, once again, and your team, on behalf of the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation. I'm delighted to introduce you to the newly appointed Agent General for Western Australia in the United Kingdom and Europe, Mr. John Langoulant AO, who officially commenced in his role today. and I'm sure is known to many of you, given his, thank you. Given his extensive experience within Western Australia government and industry. It's a terrific role, a very traditional role. I understand it's governed by legislation, which is so old it doesn't mention the word Western Australia in the legislation itself. And can I say, as one of the decisions I had to take to Cabinet around his appointment, one of the most unpopular decisions I've ever had to take to Cabinet, as I had 16 other Cabinet members saying, what about me? But John, I know you'll do a fantastic job, and we very much welcome you to the team. And the team also includes Krista Dunstan, Investment and Trade Commissioner for ASEAN, Chris Bandy, Investment and Trade Commissioner for India Gulf, and Nicole Fasana, Investment and Trade Commissioner for Northeast Asia. Joanne Liu, who I'm sure many of you know, is the Investment and Trade Commissioner for China, but is unable to attend this evening for personal reasons and sends her apologies. Western Australia offers the world a unique set of strengths and capabilities, from a highly skilled workforce through our abundant resources. Our economy has remained strong throughout 2021, with investment and trade essential drivers to economic recovery, resilience, and diversified growth. In 2021-22, Western Australia continued to strengthen its approach to attracting investment and growing trade as part of our focus on diversifying the economy. Our Agent General and 4 Investment and Trade Commissioners play an important role within the Western Australian investment and trade ecosystem. They are our feet on the ground, advocating for our state and its existing and emerging industries in key international markets. In September 2020, the Premier announced changes to the International Investment and Trade Office Network to strengthen investment and trade outcomes for Western Australia. These changes have seen the network move to a hub and spoke model, with the international offices now grouped into 5 regional hubs: ASEAN, China, India Gulf, and Northeast Asia, are each led by an Investment and Trade Commissioner, while the United Kingdom Europe region will continue to be led by an Agent General. This approach ensures our overseas network is agile and well positioned to respond to emerging market and industry priorities, particularly in a post-COVID-19 world. Whilst the commissioners have been based in Perth since their appointment due to the COVID-19 travel restrictions, they have been leading our overseas teams remotely as we continue to have locally engaged staff deployed across the state's international network. During this time, this new generation of trade commissioners have undertaken an extensive onboarding program, which has provided them with a strong grounding in the current priorities of the Western Australian industry and a deep understanding of our government's economic development and diversification agenda. They maintain a sharp focus on the strategic investment and trade priorities of the state and the role each region plays in delivering on those priorities. I'm also very excited to announce tonight that Krista, Nicole, and John will be deployed into market later this month. This will ensure the Western Australian Government has a senior representative located within the ASEAN, Northeast Asia and United Kingdom Europe regions to engage directly with key government and industry stakeholders. Joanne Liu, Investment and Trade Commissioner for China, will be deployed early in the new year, with our India Gulf Commissioner to follow. I encourage you to take the opportunity tonight to introduce yourselves to John, Krista, Nicole and Chris. If you have not already met them, they certainly look forward to working with you. While our Agent General, Investment and Trade Commissioners and International Office staff represents the state's international investment and trade interests offshore, they are supported by the Perth Hub of Invest and Trade WA. Launched in 2019, Invest and Trade WA acts as a front door for investors and customers interested in doing business with Western Australia and supports local small and medium-sized enterprises looking to expand their operations in overseas markets. Invest and Trade WA proactively seeks out opportunities for international trade and investment and delivers a range of engagements and activities focused on Western Australia's key markets and priority sectors. Many of these activities have been delivered on in innovative ways due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I know that Rebecca Brown has key members of her team responsible for Investment and Trade WA here tonight, including Simone Spencer, Deputy Director General, Strategy and International Engagement, and Christian Dawson, Executive Director, Invest and Trade WA. Please get in touch with them if you have not already done so. I'm delighted this evening to launch the Western Australian Government's Investment and Trade Plan 2021-22, which provides a strategic whole-of-government approach to our investment and trade efforts. The plan outlines the government's investment and trade priorities for 2021-22 and key actions that will be undertaken to support our priority sectors. This includes a range of onshore and offshore activities targeting priority markets and industries, as well as targeted activities where government support is required to leverage investment and trade opportunities. A recent example of this strategic collaborative approach was India Connect, an important and timely event delivered by the Invest and Trade WA team earlier this month. India Connect was brought together through strong collaboration with the Consulate General of India in Perth, Chamber of Commerce and Industry WA, Australia-India Business Council, the Perth USAsia Centre, Confederation of Indian Industry, and the Indo-Australian Chamber of Commerce. Presented in hybrid format, India Connect provided an opportunity for more than 300 Indian and Western Australian businesses and stakeholders to come together to exchange ideas on investment and trade opportunities to support economic development and job creation in both regions. The Investment and Trade Plan 2021-22 is structured around the key sectors of the state's economy and includes sector-specific initiatives and activities from across government to ensure our investment and trade objectives are delivered in a coordinated way. A few examples include the WA Renewable Hydrogen Strategy and Fund, which supports investment and renewable hydrogen projects in WA. The Future Battery and Critical Minerals Industry Strategy, which is attracting investment and facilitating the development of downstream processing and component manufacturing projects in battery value chain. The Western Australian Aboriginal Tourism Action Plan, known as the GINAR Plan, which will position Western Australia as the nation's leading destination for Aboriginal cultural tourism experiences. We have a program of targeted offshore investment and trade activities for 2021-22 across the 5 regional hubs. Tonight, you will hear just a small snapshot of these activities from the Agent General and the Investment and Trade Commissioners. Invest and Trade WA also produces a suite of market outlooks which outlines sector-specific opportunities for Western Australian industry within our key international markets. These provide local businesses with valuable information on emerging international investments and trade opportunities in the state's 8 priority markets. I encourage you to access the plan and the new market outlooks through the QR codes available to you this evening. The plan and outlooks are also available on the Invest and Trade WA website. The Western Australian Government recognises that investment and trade are critical to economic growth and economic diversification. Our Investment and Trade Plan 2021-22 provides a clear roadmap for the Western Australia's strategic and collaborative approach to investment and trade, and their role in unlocking opportunities for sustained economic activity and the creation of quality local jobs. In closing, I take this opportunity to congratulate our Agent General and Investment and Trade Commissioners on their appointments and wish them well on their overseas deployment to advance Western Australia's investment and trade efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Premier. I appreciate that. If I could ask the Agent General and our regional Trade and Investment Commissioners to please come up and join us on the stage for a panel. It may seem a little bit unfair to ask them to speak in a public panel as they're heading out on their assignments. Normally we do this when they get back. So this is a bit of a hazing, but it's also a good chance for this community to get a sense for what they've been working on. We do, again, congratulate the Agent General on this being his first day. The other trade commissioners have actually been working virtually in that portfolio for a long time, working very closely, as the Deputy Premier announced. Just if I can add a little bit to the innovation part of the Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation portfolio. As mentioned, on most of your tables and outside, there's wonderful QR codes. And I have figured out that even me, who's relatively low on the end of the technical capability spectrum, can use my cell phone camera to click on that, and the links to these reports will pop up. So not only the overall Western Australian Trade and Investment Plan 21-22, but also the individual country market outlook. So I'd urge you to take some time to peruse that, but not during the course of the panel conversation, unless you're looking for feeders for some very good conversation. So I'm going to sit down here. I think this mic magically is going to turn on as I move over. And I'm going to note, as I sit down, that where one stands often depends heavily on where one sits. And you won't be surprised to know, and you've probably heard me say from this very stage before, that my view of the Indo-Pacific shifted dramatically 8 years ago when I moved from Washington, D.C. here to Western Australia. The University of Western Australia, where we sit, for years ran an annual In the Zone conference. I see the pioneer behind that, Tim Shanahan, here in the office. And the fundamental premise behind that was, if you wanted to understand Australia's future, you couldn't look historically and longitudinally. You couldn't look at our relationship back to the East Coast, where we could claim that we're the most isolated capital city in the world, which is not necessarily true. You had to look north, and you had to look to the future, and you had to look north and to the east, rather to the west, and recognize that we're in some respects closer to Singapore than we are to Sydney, closer to Jakarta than we are to Canberra, and that our future as a state really lie in the Indo-Pacific as a region. I would also acknowledge that Minister Smith, when he was defense minister, was the first government official anywhere in this region to incorporate the term Indo-Pacific in a government document in the 2013 Defense White Paper. I, as many of you will know, just returned from 2 weeks in Washington, D.C. and New York, where I can attest that on the farthest city on the planet on land away from Perth, Washington, D.C., that term Indo-Pacific is firmly rooted in US strategy, in UK strategy, in global strategy, and sitting in Western Australia, I think that gives us a wonderful point of view. So I'm going to start off with a big picture opening question about where we sit and what opportunities come from that. Had I had this conversation 2 years ago, I would have thought that someone on the stage didn't quite belong, right? That we had an agent general in London, and one of these things is not quite like the others in terms of Indo-Pacific strategy. But if you look at the last year alone, the United Kingdom has applied for membership in the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP. And just 3 weeks ago, there was a landmark agreement between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States called AUKUS, not just on submarines, but also on a much deeper technology sharing that really presages a very proactive United Kingdom Indo-Pacific strategy. So I'm actually going to start for the one who's the furthest away from the heart of the Indo-Pacific, in the UK, and start with you, John, and ask you all, what does Western Australia's geographic location, where we sit, what does that portend for our trade and investment engagement in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, thank you, Gordon. It's always good to get an easy question first. And I might say I'm no expert on foreign affairs. You know, just as recently as Friday, I was worrying about the future of the quokka on Rottnest Island. But having said that, look, my view is the Indo-Pacific has always been important. China, in so many ways, is making it more important. And the world is engaged on this issue. Australia is a key player on the world stage. I mean, sure, we sit outside the group of 8, but we sit inside the group of 20. So we are important in terms of strategic importance. And one of the things which we're all concerned about is we are a very significant trader because we have very strategic commodities and products which we sell to the rest of the world, of which I think many in the Indo-Pacific area recognise acutely. And it probably had something to do with the whole question of the recent military decisions, which were taken at the federal level. So I look at it as being, we continue to play our role as relatively small but emerging in the space, and we're relevant. And I think that's the key point. And as I sit in London, I mean, the world's a very integrated world now. It's, you know, we've been playing globalization games for, you know, decades. And the communication, the significance of the importance, the fact that the United Kingdom's in on this deal around the submarines, the whole position of where Europe was going to go in terms of Indo-Pacific policy in any event, we've got to see ourselves as a player in that space. You can't not.
Fantastic. Now, the Deputy Premier already introduced the Western Australia Trade and Investment Commissioners, but just so you can associate the names with the faces, and I think looking around the room, most of you will all know them as well. Krista Dunstan's the Investment and Trade Commissioner for Asean. Next to her, we have Chris Bandy, who's the Investment and Trade Commissioner for India in the Gulf. And then next to me is Nicole Fasana, Investment and Trade Commissioner for Northeast Asia. So I'm going to ask you all that same question in turn with a little bit of a twist. Krista, in your case, our near neighbors are Southeast Asia. Singapore is often referred to as Perth's northern suburb, although the truth is we're probably Singapore's southern suburb, but we'll take it as we want to. What does our geographic location mean for you in your upcoming transition to be in Singapore and working in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I guess the thing that makes it really easy is the time zone, because we're almost, like you said, closer to Southeast Asia than we are to the eastern states, and it makes doing business really easy. But I think what we have learnt from COVID is the importance of regional supply and value chains. And the only way to be a part of them as a West Australian is to integrate with our regional community, which is Southeast Asia. I think it's about recognising our strengths, and we have a lot of value to add as an investment and trade partner, but also recognising where we lean on our partners in the region to achieve further down the value chain success. And that's something that we can work together on, whether you're talking about batteries and critical minerals, for example, hydrogen and green steel. There's lots of partnerships to be had and made within that region, and RCEP, the Regional Partnership Agreement, is an example of that happening and being realised in real trade and investment terms.
Fantastic. Chris, I'm going to go to you. If you look almost due west or slightly northwest in the process, there's India, but also the Gulf on the far side of that. Can I ask you the same question, but put it in the prism of India and the Gulf?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think it's all about being good neighbours and being good neighbours in your own neighbourhood. But I think looking to the Indian perspective, what we see there is a huge talent pool of highly educated people. But also what we see is a huge pool of international students who for the last 2 years have been basically stuck in Australia, finishing their studies but unable to leave and go anywhere. But where we've relied on them is as our frontline workers. Where we've relied on them is to keep our hospitality business industry going. So I think it's... But I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think with our Indian counterparts, we need to be looking to deepen and broaden our trade and investment relationships, and to particularly harness the skills and capability that exists there. So what kind of jumps out to me is that, you know, catch-all term advanced manufacturing, which does cover a lot. But inside of that is your defence industries, your health and your medtech side of the coin, where I think there is significant capability in India that we can harness to grow our own industry, whether that's in India with Australian companies or whether that's back here utilising Indian capability.
Fantastic. Now, Nicole, Northeast Asia may be the far north, but in terms of the closeness of the relationship, historically and today, Japan, Korea are really important partners economically for the States. So can you tell us about where we sit and how that impacts West Australia's trade and investment interest in Northeast Asia?
I think the current geopolitical situation in the region is actually, it produces a lot of opportunity for our relationship with Northeast Asia. Japan and Korea have been very, supportive of the AUKUS, and we have the Quad. So there's a whole bunch of federal frameworks that have presented new opportunities now. And I think that in terms of the defense and space sectors, I think there's a really new opportunity there to provide an alternative supply chain to these countries apart from the US as the supplier for services in defense and space. And of course, the already strong relationship we have in the energy and resources sector will be reinforced by this, the current sort of geopolitical situation as well.
Well, fantastic. I think many of you may know that the 25 years I spent in Washington, D.C. before I moved to Perth was a period of time where I woke up every single morning knowing that I had to make the case that Asia is important, pay attention to Asia. I have not had to do that one day in Perth, right? We get that intuitively. The fact that there's 150 of you sitting here and many more online on a beautiful Monday evening lets you know how important that region is. Now, having said that, the response when I was in Washington to AUKUS reminded me that there's still, both in Washington and a little bit in Canberra, this tendency to look still to the Europe for your response. And so we spent now a month talking about France and the French response, which is important. And France is a very important partner in the Indo-Pacific. But having said that, as Nicole just mentioned, the Japanese response, quite positive. The Korean response, quite positive. The Indian response, very positive. And because this was an agreement that was very much about the Indo-Pacific, it behooves us to have a panel that kind of focus on the Indo-Pacific. John, if I can come back to you, the relationship economically between Western Australia and the United Kingdom is actually quite a bit different than that of Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, India, and the Gulf. And that is because it's much more been characterized by investment. The UK has been a very important investment, and that, in addition to your work with Quokkas, is something you're deeply familiar with in terms of your long career here in Perth. In recent years, you've seen, again, the UK espouse its own Indo-Pacific strategy. They're also in the process of negotiating a new free trade agreement with Australia, as well as applying for membership in the CPTPP. So what opportunities do you think there are for Western Australian businesses to attract investment from the United Kingdom? And how's that going to be part of your portfolio when you arrive in London in a couple of weeks?
It's going to be a big part. The data I saw today is the UK is our third largest trade partner and our third largest source of finance from around the world. That's pretty significant in whatever way you want to measure it. And the UK's finance system all the way through, the European Union was so important for world finance, and it's been important for WA's finance in terms of seeing the mineral base of Western Australia develop over the last 60, 70 years. So we come off a rich history with the UK in particular around a source of investment and a source of trade. And we have very strong people-to-people contact, and we can't underestimate that. The people-to-people contact into Western Australia is significant. It brings many forms of economic activity, and we need to continue to build on that. The trade agreement, which is being negotiated, we should all welcome trade agreements, because most trade agreements take barriers to trade away, and that's what is significant about them, and everyone benefits from that. In this particular instance, I think the significant beneficiaries will be across our agricultural sectors, but not just about across our agricultural sectors. It'll free up the trade of people in terms of people being able to move more easily between the UK and Australia, particularly in terms of the skill bases that they will bring across the two countries. Very important for us. I mean, you just have a look at Western Australia now with our closed borders, and you look back at the times when so many people from the UK have come into Western Australia and have been a significant part of our labour force, and we look forward to that again. I mean, a few people have said to me, the first thing I've got to do when I get to London is find a few cooks. A few others have said nurses, and a few others have said many other things. I would say across the broad spectrum of our workforce, we look forward to those developments happening again. And the trade agreements, I think, go further. They reflect a relationship, and that's the key issue, because that structured relationship is so important for the development of investments, which you probably can't even see when you write those trade agreements. So look, it's going to be a big part of what I do. There are many aspects of economic activity which are really pertinent to WA at the moment. And, you know, one which just resonates, and I've already had a couple of briefings on it even before I started today, is around hydrogen. And what are we going to do in this hydrogen sector? And how are we going to bring the significant investment we're going to need to see hydrogen develop as a core and stable source of renewable energy, which will allow us to achieve all of the goals we have for climate change. So just another little thing to have a look at.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. We don't have a fancy QR table on a code on your table, but if you go to the Perth USAsia Centre website, you'll note that over the last several years, we have done a number of edited volumes. The first one on India and the Indo-Pacific, then one on Indonesia and the Indo-Pacific, Vietnam and the Indo-Pacific, Japan and Korea in the Indo-Pacific. And most recently, just last month, my colleague James Bone is here in the back. He edited a joint volume together with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Canberra on Europe's Indo-Pacific Embrace Global Partnerships for Regional Resilience, with chapters that really focus on what Europe's doing in this space, specifically what France is doing, what Germany is doing, what the Netherlands are doing, what the UK is doing. And I think it gives you a good sense for the growing focus on this region from that region, and the particular importance that we have geographically being here, as we like to say, at the fulcrum point of the Indo-Pacific. And so it's a very strong point that we have to make. Krista, I want to go back to you on ASEAN, a very diverse region, and yet a very dynamic region. It's different than Australia's, particularly Western Australia's, long-standing trade relationships with Korea, with Japan, with China today, that have what Stephen often refers to as a backbone of the resource trade, right? If you have a backbone of initially from the east, you know, from coal or the iron ore or LNG, a lot of other ancillary industries can be built off of that. We don't necessarily have that in Southeast Asia, and yet we also have tremendous potential. So what are the sectors that interest you? What are your priorities in terms of countries, and what things do you think are going to be dominating your time when you arrive in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky to have such a diverse portfolio in ASEAN, because there's kind of something in everything. Each market plays out differently. So, you know, international education is a huge priority in the ASEAN region because there's huge potential for Western Australia. But how that plays out in each market looks slightly different. You know, it's quite a mature university sector in Singapore, with Murdoch having its campus there. Then you've got in Malaysia, Curtin having its campus in Sarawak. But in Indonesia, it's more about partnerships with local providers. And so you've got the WA TVET consortia working to bring vet training and education there and sort of upskilling local workforce. We've got SCASA going out, which is our West Australian Curriculum Authority, selling West Australian education as a system into these markets. So it really plays out differently, kind of depending on where you're talking about. But what's consistent is the quality of West Australian education and the recognition that getting a West Australian education sets you up for a good, strong career. But it's not the only sector. I mean, we've got agri-food, we've got good, clean produce, and that's recognised, and it's worth paying a premium for. And that has been the thing that has really launched ICEPA, being the federal agreement with Indonesia. We've had a lot of success in carrots, apples, onions, grapes, all those really sexy things. But it's the heart of the relationship, and it's about the people to connect, but we haven't been able to do that so much with COVID. And so really it's about what can we offer? What is the need in that market, and how does West Australia meet it? So it plays out differently, but it's sort of consistent in themes, if I can put it that way. I think what I found most interesting and exciting is probably the defence and space opportunities. I probably didn't appreciate coming into this role, the strength of Western Australia's capability, built off things like the resources sector, our strength in remote operations, how our remoteness, how our extreme temperatures, how big Western Australia is as a state has led to innovations that play out really successfully in the region as well, as we kind of grapple with a new way of doing things and we advance into green energy and meeting those goals for those different markets. So whether that's sort of solar and tech in Malaysia, or whether that's hydrogen in Singapore as a hub, it sort of plays out differently. It's the battery industry in Indonesia, but we have a role to play. So there's a lot to do, and it's very exciting. For me, I think the one that I'm really looking forward to is probably the R&D space. I've been really impressed by West Australia's capability to do R&D in particularly alternate proteins. Our universities are doing some really exciting stuff in health and medtech, and to see us opening up to partnerships in the region to work on that together to solve today's problems for tomorrow's future, that's pretty exciting.
Fantastic, thank you. Chris, India, slightly different still, and yet really important. You had a chance to participate in and see the India Connect event a couple of weeks ago. Would you give us some of the insights that you drew from that program for WA's India specific strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that's come through really clear is that we're seen as a reliable partner for India. And that's, I guess, indicated by the fact that we've had a trade office in India for 25 years this year ongoing. We've got a fantastic team on the ground there that are deeply connected into industry, but because our team is so connected, people come to them often for a variety of opportunities. We deliberately chose the four sectors, well, the four, I guess, key themes that we pursued at the India Connect, being the critical battery materials, tourism and international education, advanced manufacturing, and agri-food. The critical battery materials piece is really interesting. So India has 16, 17 different electric vehicle strategies at the moment, one obviously at the federal level, and then each state has their own electric vehicle strategy as they push to reduce their emissions targets. Now that's hugely confusing, but also provides huge opportunity for Western Australia. However, what we're seeing is that, unfortunately, being the only jurisdiction on Earth that has all the critical battery materials and rare earths in one place, we're obviously, I guess we're very popular in that regard, and a lot of our offtake is already spoken for. So the discussions that we're having with a lot of Indian producers has been recently, can we get your offtake? No, there's none left. Okay, well, what can we do? I'm like, well, unfortunately, I can't just create it for you. And so then the next discussion that comes back about a week later is, okay, well, can I buy the mine? Because if I buy the mine, then it's my offtake. So, they're the sorts of investors you want coming to you because, they're kind of saying money's no object and just sell me a mine. So we're seeing a bit of a change in the way that Western Australia and India interact, because it's been seen for a long time as purely a trading partner. 80% of our, I guess, trade relationship at the moment is in gold, alumina, and petroleum. Now, how do we diversify that? We don't diversify away from it. We defend and grow the sectors that we already have relationships in, because the best customer is the one you've already got. And then what we do is we look at other options, which is why at the India Connect, we then looked at international education and tourism. WA is unique to the rest of Australia in that Indians are our largest source of international students, whereas the rest of Australia, it's from China. So what do we need to do in that sector? We need to work really, really hard to ensure that we are still seen as the number one jurisdiction for Indian students to come to Australia. But it can't just be about student recruitment. So we've got to look at how we can engage more deeply with Indian institutions and work on collaborative research partnerships, skills transfers, transfer of teachers, whatever it might be, just to deepen those relationships and see how we can get more students and I guess a deeper engagement in the international education space. But that lends itself very nicely to the tourism piece. So tourism is hugely prospective from the Indian market by way of their tourists coming here. But the main thing that's going to get that to happen is a direct flight. So that's a key priority of the market, is working on those direct flight links between India and Western Australia to ensure that, yes, we can get the people here to see everything that the wonderful West has, but also to get mums and dads to come and visit their family. And the other piece of that is we're really focused on seeing how we can get some significant conferences out of India to be held in Western Australia. Just before COVID, we had about 60 doctors coming down to have a conference in Western Australia, which would have been really great for visitation and the tourism dollar. Unfortunately, COVID, like many things, stopped that from happening, which was really disappointing. So there's some of the focuses that we're working on. And then you look at the agriculture sector, again, similar to what Krista said, it's clean, it's green, and people are willing to pay a premium for our products. The Department of Prime Industries and Regional Development have done a fantastic job working with the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources federally to ensure that West Australian produce gets preferential access into India. And that's something that, once on the ground and that the team already there is working on to ensure that West Australian produce is positioned both in stores, but also in online retailers to ensure we can get to the right people. And finally, I touched on it earlier, but the advanced manufacturing piece, specifically focusing around the health and medtech space, there's huge opportunities there. And we're leveraging our team on the ground to ensure that we're getting out to the right people and having those discussions. Finally, in 2017, we did sign a cis-state relationship with Andhra Pradesh. Sadly, once that started to gain some traction, COVID shut down all travel, and we've recently reached out to Andhra Pradesh because that is due for signing again at the end of this year. They've indicated they're very, very keen to work with us. So once we can, we'll start those negotiations in earnest with the Andhra Pradesh government to see how we can deepen relationships further.
Even in a large room like this, it's possible to hear ears being perked. And I do know that the CEO of Perth Airport here, Kevin Brown's here. I heard his ears perk, as well as the Japanese Consul General. Those direct flights to Tokyo were really successful pre-COVID, and I'm sure we'd love to have them established again. And there'll probably nobody be more happy to have the direct flight to London reestablished than our Agent General there. So I appreciate that. Nicole, let's go back to Northeast Asia. That relationship has largely been defined initially by iron ore, and before that even their coal, but lately has been heavily dominated by energy. And as the world, and we see this in our capital and global capitals, right, there wrestles with climate change, they're all looking for transitions. There's a heavy focus on hydrogen, deep interest in that in Japan and Korea. You will all note a couple of weeks ago, the Perth USAsia Centre launched a report on hydrogen. The core conclusion is that, that drive that's going to come from Japan and Korea is going to be really important in providing the pull to help us develop our own interest there. I think it's the 4th of November, if I'm correct. The Perth USAsia Centre is going to be formally launching that report, also by my colleague James, together with Minister Alana McTiernan. So if you're not familiar with that yet, please go to our website and check that out. That should be a really interesting program there. But if I can bring that back to you, can you give us a sense for how important energy is going to be in your portfolio in Japan and Korea, and in particularly that energy transition?
Absolutely. And I think the, hydrogen and critical minerals will absolutely dominate my priorities in the market. Japan and Korea have been such long-standing partners for us in that space. And without those long-term contracts in iron ore and LNG, we wouldn't have those industries we have here today. And I think we can absolutely create the same kind of export industry for hydrogen if we just, continue to build on those relationships. So I think also WA is it's a very unique position. We have existing infrastructure, world-class ports. We have those existing relationships with our export partners, and we've tackled technological challenges in energy before. We've managed to export LNG into Japan and Korea. So I think if we learn to actually work really closely with our existing relationships, we can make this industry happen. And I mean, not only that, we're in pretty much in the best location in the world for renewable energy. So there's not many places around the world you can produce 24/7 renewable energy. So solar during the day, wind at night. And, to be able to harness that and the amount of land that we have, we can scale up. There's huge potential here. And I think our Northeast Asia partners do recognize that. So I think it's just about, focusing on building those relationships. So a lot of the subsidiaries of the trading houses that I've dealt with here in Perth have become so extremely active. And, most of the time when investment decisions are made, the head office comes here and makes the decisions, but these subsidiaries are actually making a lot of these decisions. So, we need to connect more with these subsidiaries. And also, I acknowledge Consul General Suzuki. His office has been so active in working with us in promoting trade and investment across that space as well. So I think it's just about, connecting, building on those relationships and seeing that, yeah, that's pretty much, yeah.
Fantastic. Now, one of the things I would observe is that not a single person on this stage has the luxury of focusing just on one country. You're covering not just the UK, but all of Europe. ASEAN is so diverse. India and the Gulf, obviously in Northeast Asia, you've got that as well. The Deputy Premier in his opening remarks talked about the hub and spoke approach. And this is probably a little bit of an unfair question, given the fact that the Deputy Premier is here and you've got the Director General of the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation here. But could you tell us a little bit more about the hub and spokes approach, how that's going to work? Because obviously, there are limits to any state's resources, and it's a really big world out there. Tell us about the advantages of that approach and how it's going to impact your strategy going forward. And I won't go through it. I'll just open it up to who wants to kind of comment on how it's going to impact you?
I can jump in from an
Yeah.
ASEAN
Well,
perspective.
ASEAN, you've got the biggest amount of diversity there, so appropriate.
So we previously had 2 offices within the region, which are our hub offices, so Indonesia and Singapore, and they remain, and they're kind of the heart of what we do. Singapore has a really strong investment focus, and we've got investors really looking to diversify their investment across a whole range of sectors in Western Australia, and we're doing that work out of that hub. And then Indonesia, of course, is just such a critical partner for us as Western Australians, not only because of how close it is, because of the significant opportunities there. But there are many other markets in the ASEAN region, and ASEAN, you know, the terminology itself comes from the way in which that region represents itself. You know, Australia's been a strong dialogue partner in ASEAN, recognizing that there's an interconnectedness there. So we need to look at the region, we need to participate more regionally. And that means bringing in Vietnam. And we've recently signed an MOU with Bria Vung Tau, which is a southern province in Vietnam, recognizing that there is a lot of synergy between the opportunities in Western Australia and the opportunities there. We also have an education BDM currently stationed in Hanoi in Vietnam, exploring some of the educational opportunities for WA. So that's a spoke that's existing. But previously we had a connection in KL in Malaysia that dissipated over time as we moved to the Singapore office. And that really is a lost opportunity for us, because Malaysia is a really strong market for ASEAN. It has our highest number of international students coming into WA. And there's so much tech development and so much opportunity. There are really strong West Australian businesses anchored in Sarawak in particular. So it's a missed opportunity not to have someone on the ground there supporting West Australian businesses and really leveraging those opportunities. And then you look at Thailand and the Philippines, and they play themselves out so differently in terms of the opportunities there. And it's about being dynamic. You don't need to have an office staffed with 20 people everywhere, and you can't be all things to all people, but you need to recognize the specific opportunities in a market, the specific skill set required, and go after that hard for Western Australia. And that's what the spokes do. They allow us to be in different markets for different purposes to really service WA business.
Fantastic, well articulated. Anything else? Anybody else would like to add to that?
Pretty clear, I guess, but from my perspective in the I guess, India Gulf region, the term India Gulf is a bit of a misnomer, because we are really responsible for the Middle East, South Asia region, which does present itself with a lot of opportunities. And you look at India, a population of 1.38 billion people, and we have one office situated in Mumbai. So we work really closely with our colleagues in the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. However, their remit is to look after all of Australia, and we are really there to prosecute the Western Australian opportunity. So for us, it's a great time to reassess where we have, I guess, our spokes within the India market. And do we look at Kolkata as the mining and mets hub and have someone there? Do we look at co-locating closely with our federal counterparts and being in New Delhi? So there's a lot of decisions that are being made and a lot of research is being undertaken to determine where we'll be in the Indian market. But then Pakistan's emerging as a huge source of international students. So do we look at having an education BDM based in Pakistan? Then you move into the Middle East, region, and obviously out of the UAE and Dubai and Abu Dhabi, there's significant investment flows. But then we're seeing significant investment and significant interest out of Saudi Arabia. No state has an office in Saudi Arabia. So could we be the pioneering state that looks to plant our flag in Saudi? So I think at the moment, all of this is on the table, and we're just going through the process of researching what makes sense for this state, what makes sense for the team that we've got, and how we can just best support Western Australia and West Australian industry.
I think also this model allows us to actually grow. So it doesn't stop just here. You know, there's potential to grow more hubs or more spokes, and that model allows us to have that agility.
Fantastic. John, any final comments on your part?
Well, I was letting my colleagues talk because they've been in the thrust of the policy a lot more, but I had my eyes open to this policy today, and it just stands to reason, quite honestly. The world's pretty dynamic. Markets are changing at a pace. As a state jurisdiction, you know, we can't afford to have substantial offices all around the world. You've got to be very strategic in the way you look at it, and hub and spoke just stands to reason. So have people in those markets which are emerging, where there really is opportunity. They don't have to be there forever. Put them in and take them out as you need around an office which can support them, as everyone's been saying. So to me, it's a very logical policy. And, I mean, this does represent a big step up in trade policy on the part of the West Australian government. I mean, I've been around the WA government now for a long time, and this is the most active that I've seen this strategy over that time frame. So, you know, I think this is quite encouraging, and it's up to us to actually make it work, and that's what we're here about.
So I do appreciate that at least three of you are quite excited to be deployed soon, right, in the next couple of weeks in terms of that process. The disadvantage of that, of course, is that we're not going to have you here. One of again, I look out of the room, I see so many of our other peer organizations, and I've actually gotten quite used to seeing you on such a regular basis around town, because there's lots of different events, and having you here in town has been very helpful. But it highlights my final question, and then I promise I'll open it up to a broader conversation, and that is the challenges of connectivity. You have lived now, for quite a long time, trying to operate from WA. You're going to be kind of pioneers out there first. It's going to be a while before the rest of us are able to travel as freely as we might like to back into the region. What advice might you give for us here, institutions, companies, government officials, for how we might better and deeper engage in this region, in a moment where we're still not able to travel as freely as we'd like?
I'll have the first crack, and then I think you hit the nail on the head very early in your comments then, Gordon, around the fact that there's a lot of support available for Western Australian industry located in Western Australia. So take Invest and Trade WA, we have a Perth Hub. There's 30 staff dedicated to progressing Western Australia's trade and investment agenda focused, on Western Australian industry. They're here, they're ready to work with you. You can access them at any time. But one thing, I guess, not to understate is you've got the Perth USAsia Centre here now. I've read a lot of, for example, on the India side, a lot of what Sonia's put out in recent times, and it's perfect. It makes perfect sense. It gives great advice, and it shows a path forward. So you can leverage the skill sets that exist at the Perth USAsia Centre. Then you've got CCIWA. Then you've got a huge network of business councils, both Asian and non-Asian business councils that you can leverage, who have deep engagement and deep links into the different markets. And then you have diaspora communities of all the different groups that we work with that you can test your theory out with the diaspora community, with people that know the market, that are from that market, who can tell you whether something will work or won't work. So I think that's one thing, I guess one piece of advice will be to latch on to and leverage the opportunities that exist on your doorstep in Western Australia. But the way we've been handling it to date, and working really closely with the Invest and Trade WA team, it stands to reason investors want to step foot into Western Australia and see what they're going to put their money into. It makes perfect sense. So with that, those that are willing to, I guess, come in and quarantine here, we work with them. We pull together visit programs for them, and we treat them like we would anyone who comes into the state to look at an investment project. However, we've had to be innovative with COVID, and we've had to look at how we can engage with investors, with retailers, consumers, and buyers internationally. So across the course of the last 18 months, 2 years, and I'll let everyone speak to their own markets, but we've run a number of different events where, for example, there's an investor who's looking to invest in the West Australian space industry. Now, they're from the US, they couldn't get here. What we did was we put together a virtual mission for them where they spoke to over 30 different stakeholders in Western Australia to articulate what they were trying to do, to work their way through. And then, we did things as silly as go and stand in paddocks on the back of utes, holding up iPads to give them a virtual tour. Now, I don't know if any of you have visited.
That's commitment.
Well, it's commitment. And I guess it goes to show kind of the level of interest and the lengths that the team in Western Australia will go to, because, and this might get me in trouble for saying this, but, there are parts of Western Australia that do all look alike. So it's pretty difficult to tell whether I'm showing them a paddock in Collie or a paddock in Serpentine or something, up near Geraldton. They're just taking my word for it that that's the paddock that they're potentially looking at to invest in. So we've done that not because we know that that's going to be the final step to get an investor into the market, but because we know that we need to remain connected to our international investors, and we need to show that as a state and as a state government, we are willing to go the extra mile to get their investment into our state. But the guys probably have specific examples of their own markets.
Kirsten, Nicole, you've been living this for months. What observations do you have from your own experience?
Yeah, I mean, we've utilised technology to its fullest. Certainly, we've been involved in a lot of investment and trade webinars and those kinds of things, working with our market partners like the Malaysian Consul General here in Perth and their Investment and Development Authority based on the East Coast, actually, and it's much harder to actually work with the East Coast than it is with Malaysia. But we've kind of all brought it together through technology to work together to understand what the opportunities are for both markets, because while COVID has been challenging and it's really interrupted the people-to-people on the ground links, life rolls on, business rolls on, investment rolls on, and we need to be out there communicating about Western Australia and talking to our partners and being good friends in the region. We negotiated a plan of action with that Berea Vung MOU to bring it to life virtually. And that was a really, you've got the language barriers, you haven't met, and you're talking about a new relationship because it's an MOU with a state that hasn't been enacted yet. And yet there's a lot of trust and good faith. And I think that's kind of what Chris was getting to in terms of the relationship basis, to go, okay, we're going to step forward in this together, because particularly in ASEAN, the COVID challenge is real. We've been so blessed in WA. I think we talk about not being able to travel and, some of the harshness of the lack of people to people, but we haven't been worried about our own individual health and safety. We haven't been stuck at home working with kids for 18 months to 2 years. Those sort of very real challenges have been faced on the ground by our staff, because all of our staff are still working in market as well, and by our partners. And so it's a matter of kind of understanding, working with them. So for them, that reach out and that connect over technology is actually a sign of good faith that we're continuing the relationship at a time when that is absolutely the best that market can manage. So it's been really dynamic. As Chris mentioned, we've had to think about how we do things differently, how we bring WA home. We're really lucky, I think, in having tourism as part of JETSI, because they sell WA really well. So if we, depending on what the particular restrictions were in Singapore, if you could bring everyone into a hotel on the Singaporean side, serve them some West Australian food, some West Australian wine, and then link them up virtually with a West Australian producer who wants to sell them apples, then that's a great way of selling the story of WA, the quality of the produce, so they can, taste it, hear it, feel it, and be a part of that West Australian story. So we've had to be dynamic and we've had to adapt, and we'll keep doing that. We're certainly your eyes and ears in market, us and our teams, and we're there to represent WA and connect your industry in when you can't necessarily do it in person yourself, but certainly think differently about how you integrate your business into the new way of doing things.
Fantastic. Any final comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's just about trying to be sensitive, during this time as well. Many of the Japanese and Korean trading, houses, they've sent people here, and that's because they're really committed to Western Australia, but they've gone and done the 2 weeks quarantine and gone through all that effort and, to come and commit to this. So, and many of them are actually separated from their families. So it's just about trying to be sensitive to that. So we've started putting together some care packs when they're in quarantine to say, look, we're really happy that you've made the effort to come here and to continue that relationship with them.
Oh, fantastic. I appreciate that.
I think, Gordon, the other point is,
yeah, please.
Is we've got to be sensitive to make the commitment. I mean, I think that's been through these answers, but actually getting out there and being on the ground. If you're going to have a hub and spoke model, then you've got to have a few people in the hubs. Otherwise, what are you doing? So it's time to, I think, ensure that we are well represented in those hubs. In the London office, for instance, it's been since the end of June, since Mike came back. So in my read of it is it's time to get over there and, raise the flag again. And I'm really looking forward to getting into London as the days get shorter and the weather gets worse. So it should be something to look forward to, really.
Well, I can echo those comments. This has been the longest I've ever been away from at least in 35 years. I've been away from Washington, D.C. And I was extremely fortunate to be there at a time that there was this historic ASEAN ministerial, our defense and foreign ministers meeting together, their counterparts in the United States, plus the historic AUKUS agreement, and then the Quad Leaders Summit in terms of process. And again, we do everything we can to maintain connectivity. And I think the advice we've gotten is very good, but there really is no substitute for being there. And so it's going to be wonderful for the state to have you there in presence. Look, I've gone on too long. We're running relatively short on time. We asked a number of people to submit some questions earlier, and they did. The first of which is Sam Walsh, who I think needs no introduction to the audience, but in addition to his long time with Rio, is on the board of Mitsui, if I'm correct.
You are correct. Look, I've been really encouraged by the dialogue. I think the Deputy Premier's comment about diversifying the economy is a seriously important one for us as you look forward sort of 2030 and the changes that we'll see both with iron ore and with gas as the world decarbonises. We do need to look for for new industries, and I'm really, really pleased to hear your comments about that. I have a tough question for you, and I'm not even sure if you can answer it, but how do you measure success? Or how does the government, how does the Deputy Premier measure success of what you're doing? Given that, if we're talking about new commodities, and you've mentioned hydrogen and critical minerals, I mean, these are going to take a lot of work to get to contracts. Hopefully there will be some inbound investment, because that's exactly what happened with the iron ore industry and the gas industry in the North West Shelf. If we didn't have overseas investors, we couldn't have justified those projects. But I'm just wondering how, given the sort of lead times that are involved, given that the difficulty of generating interest and what have you, how do you measure success? The other comment I'd make is, Chris, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, and my ears pricked up because I'm a director of a company in Riyadh, Ma'aden, a Saudi Arabian mining company. And I'd be very happy to talk to you about Saudi 2030. Thank you.
How do you measure success? Tough one.
All right, I'll go first. Just, yeah, look around the room and thanks for the support. So I guess the dollars and cents outcomes is one way you can look at it. Our relationship with, I guess, the Indian region from 2019-20, where they were our 15th largest trading partner, to 2021, they're now our 12th largest trading partner at $3.2 billion. So I guess in its purest form, that the dollar number is, I guess, one way you would measure success. For me, it's more about seeing more West Australian produce on shelves when I walk into Lulu in Dubai. So understanding that we've done our job to get more high-end produce into the market. For me, it's seeing more companies here in Western Australia, and that's not necessarily buying up huge mining tenements, but it's looking at, medtech firms setting up in Western Australia, or it's looking at how we can get, I guess, more international students here. So for me, I guess it's all those things, but it's the development of more people-to-people links as well, which I think is hugely important, because for me, and I've got a long history in Indonesia, where I lived for 11 years as well. And what I find, I guess, saddest is the numbers of students studying Indonesian language in Western Australia is going through the floor. So year on year, there's less and less studying and understanding more about our closest neighbour. And it's the same for a lot of the countries that we have West Australian government offices in. So for me, another measure of success would be seeing more young people coming through in Western Australia, and more, I guess, business people actually learning another language and actually learning more about the culture in which we need to engage with. Because I think before we see huge spikes and huge changes in our success, we can have all the diversification plans that we want to, and they're exceptionally important to have a plan and have a goal, but we definitely do need more understanding at that baseline level to ensure that we're speaking the same language, both physically and metaphorically.
So I will grant the Deputy Premier the right to respond any way he wants to, but I was fortunate a couple months ago to be on a Australian an AIM Asian Engagement Summit panel with the Deputy Premier, and his comment really stuck with me, which is we focus a lot, us institutionally and us as a state, on diversification, project diversification. And the vision that he laid out, which was quite compelling, which is it really needs to be diversification based upon an expanded pie, right? And so ultimately the measure of success is that the investment coming out of the UK and Europe will grow. The investment and trade coming out of and with Southeast Asia or India and the Gulf or Northeast Asia will grow, and they will grow sufficient to the point that as a state, we have a more diverse economy. We have more diverse trading partners. We have more diverse sources of investment. That seems to me to be the ultimate test, right? Because that's what we're seeking. We're seeking something that allows us to ride out for us spots with individual relationships, individual commodities, et cetera. So I don't know if I captured that right or not, but I think that's what I recall. That's good. Okay, Stephen, if I can turn to you. We've got one more thing there.
It's to the Agent General. I mean, traditionally, we have viewed our relationship with the United Kingdom as being just two things. Firstly, our historical association relationship, but secondly, economic, and the importance of UK and subsequently EU direct foreign investment has been very, very important to us. We've always underappreciated the high level of importance of Australia and UK security, strategic defence and intelligence relationship. And so when the submarine announcement was made, people were very surprised about a UK presence, which again reflected that sort of underappreciation of the strength of our UK strategic relationship. The UK has an Indo-Pacific strategy. All of the European Union has an Indo-Pacific strategy, and key European partners, France, Germany, the Netherlands, had one before the EU itself. All of this is driven by a changed China and by a security imperative rather than an economic imperative, but it's a security imperative which we can take economic advantage of. And in the fire hoses of briefings that you've had sort of on day one on the job, have you had the chance to reflect upon the fact that you're now going to a post which is not just economic, it's also security? And what underpins that most publicly recently has been the Australia, UK, US technical partnership, which is not just subs, it's also about modern technology, and expressly includes in the documentation artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, supercomputing, critical minerals, battery minerals, and the like. Have you had the chance to think about how that strategic security technology agreement between US, UK, and Australia can work to secure what we've always secured from the UK, which is direct foreign investment, in some of those emerging areas where we actually have very good expertise, supercomputing, artificial intelligence, cyber, a whole range of areas which are invaluable from a security perspective, but which we can turn into economic opportunities as well.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. My attention to much of that was actually raised when I bumped into you a couple of weeks ago, just after the announcement, and you mentioned many of those things, and I sat and thought about it. And we haven't had a briefing yet, but there's a briefing scheduled for the period of the next 2 weeks before I head away. And a lot of the things you mentioned at the end of that question about how do you grow, how do you develop this? Supercomputing, for instance. I've been the chair of PAWSI for the last 8 years. And I see there's enormous potential for us to leverage off supercomputing, including particularly into London, through the university sector of the United Kingdom. I think that's significantly important. And the technological aspects that come out of that, I think are, which drive off not only this particular decision around submarines, but more the growing relationship. That's where I want to take it. And one of the conversations I had today was with senior people at CSIRO to see just where they're going in terms of the research they're undertaking, and it's diverse. And it's an area which I really want to have a hard look at in looking at how can we leverage off that to diversify our economic base, and to the extent that security is driving it, well and good. That's about as good an answer as I can give to you right now. It'll get better. If you ask me that question in 12 months' time, I'm sure it'll be a better answer, but that's about as good as I can do now, but it's very much top of mind. Whereas, frankly, before the submarine decision, it wasn't. Yeah.
If I can take the liberty of adding to that response with a little bit of perspective from my time in New York, Washington, and LA. The events of the last month may not seem directly related to the conversation we've had, but I can assure you the level of interest in Australia, in Japan, in India, in Korea, in Southeast Asia has gone up. The profile has gone up, and there's tremendous opportunity in that for Western Australia, for Australian firms in the defense sector, in the technology sector, in space sector, even in agriculture across the board. The level of awareness and interest has gone up, and that can't help but be a good thing. That notion of a level of awareness and interest is at the heart of our collaboration this evening with the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation, because this was billed as a Trade and Invest WA showcase. And our hope is this evening, by having a chance to meet with the Agent General and with the commissioners, that you had a chance to get a sense for the quality of people that we're going to have in the region. Now, there's a lot more questions. I could prattle on for a long time, but I think the real advantage of this evening is what follows from here, and that's a networking opportunity. And so, again, with apologies to those of you who didn't get to ask questions, you're going to have an opportunity now to do them individually. We have a scant few weeks left before we lose at least 3 of the 4 members of this panel to the region, so I'd urge you to take advantage of that. Let me acknowledge that it's been a great privilege for the Perth USAsia Centre to partner with Rebecca, with her team, with Christian and Simone and Linda and others, and the wonderful commissioners and agents on the panel. I think this gives us all a sense that we are at a very important point in history for Western Australia. We've had to reset. We've got some important challenges, and that we're going to rely upon the Deputy Premier on his other portfolios as well to be able to open up. But in the process, there's a lot that we have been doing that we can do now to take advantage of that, because to be able to engage with the region, to connect to that international trade and investment, which has been, and will be in the future the lifeblood of this state, it means that this discussion we're having today, I think, is essential for our future. So again, on behalf of the Perth USAsia Centre, please join us in thanking one of our panelists and enjoy the reception to come.